Keep in touch with the Wolf Connection podcast on our Instagram handle at the Wolf Connection Pod, or email us your questions, comments, and guest ideas to podcast@wolfconnection.org. Thank you for your support, and howls to you all. Welcome to the Wolf Connection podcast. I'm your host, John Kalfa. Those of you that are about to listen to the episode coming up with Courtney Vail, we have had some breaking news and some new developments in all of the information that we spoke about in this episode. So we brought Courtney back on to the beginning of this before you all listen to the full episode, just to give you all a snapshot of the new developments and everything that is happening. So Courtney, thank you again for joining me before everybody listens to our great conversation. Just encapsulate, if you can, all of the new developments that are happening in Colorado, developing with the Cooper Creek Pack, and then all of the, I guess there's meetings and legislation stuff that's happening going on right now. So encapsulate what's happening for everybody who's listening before they hit the episode.
Okay. Glad to be back on. A lot can happen in a few days and a few weeks since we last spoke. It's incredible that the world can turn on a dime, as we know, but maybe it's fitting that this month, the month of January, will be a pivotal and crucial month for wolves in Colorado, considering 30 years ago this month, gray wolves were reintroduced into Yellowstone and central Idaho. So it's somewhat fitting that the proverbial stuff is hitting the fan, just as the commission meeting is going to happen this week, and the vote on the petition to pause reintroductions is going to vote at the CPW commission. That's Wednesday of this week. We spoke about that on the podcast. Most importantly, on January 2nd, the Fish and Wildlife Service released the results of a necropsy that had been pending that showed that Wolf 2309, the father of the Copper Creek Pack, who died a few days after capture at the end of August, actually was compromised and was killed by a gunshot wound. So basically, while we speculated what might have happened to that wolf, we knew he was underweight when he was captured. CPW reported that he had injuries to his hind leg. We did not know that those injuries were from a bullet. So Fish and Wildlife has designated that as an illegal take, and that the gunshot wound was what killed the wolf. And so now it is an illegal take. So there are two wolves now that have been shot and compromised and killed within Colorado by a perpetrator, right, which instigated our launching the Wolf Reward, the Colorado Wolf Reward. So unfortunately, those injuries probably contributed to those wolves not successfully hunting, turning to easier prey, i.e. domestic livestock, and actually increasing conflict in Colorado. So not only did those perpetrators who illegally killed those wolves contribute to conflict, they wasted taxpayer resources that could have gone to supporting the very industry and the very individuals they were hoping to support by taking out a wolf, the livestock industry. Those funds could have been used to help support producers to adapt to wolves in Colorado. So we know an injured wolf will not be as an effective hunter, and notwithstanding the fact that most of these individual wolves have not formed packs in Colorado and they're hunting alone or with just one or two wolves, it means these injuries, again, probably and likely contributed to depredations of livestock in Colorado.
And so just so people are aware, because we spoke about the number of the reward, I believe it's up to, what, 85,000 now for those that are looking?
Well, it's actually 100K.
Okay.
We've hit that mark. So it launched with a standing reward of $50,000. Groups have jumped in to join the call for justice for these wolves and have contributed various amounts. Different organizations and individuals have contributed. Center for Biological Diversity has contributed $15K. Their threshold for distributing or dispersing that reward is different than the standing reward. They're waiting for conviction, and the rest of the reward that we launched, the 85K, will be released with information resulting in prosecution or formal charges. So there's two different thresholds there. The important part is there's a lot of money for incentivizing informants that can remain anonymous to contact Fish and Wildlife Service or CPW with the existing tip lines that are in place. We've done nothing except increase the amount of the reward to incentivize the public to come forward.
Courtney, thanks for the update on the reward. It's good to know that that money is increasing and obviously helping people who want to remain anonymous to come and help with, getting information to the right people. What other things have happened in just this short time span in the 2 weeks that we spoke to you?
Well, a proposal for another ballot initiative has raised its ugly head, and that is a ballot initiative to remove wolves from the state by basically striking and repealing the statute that codifies Proposition 114. So just as there was a ballot initiative to bring wolves to the state, there is now a proposed ballot initiative to remove wolves from the state. So that proposal has been filed with the Legislative Council staff for review and comment in accordance with constitutional and statutory requirements in Colorado. It just simply repeals every bit of the statute 33-2-105.8, which brought wolves and brings wolves back to Colorado. So that council will review that proposal and will make comments to a designated representative of the measure, and then it's submitted to the title board. So they would have to then get a certain number of signatures, public signatures, to put it on the ballot. And there is a very lengthy process that we are, of course, very familiar with that must ensue. So it's just another threat that we talked about in the podcast, and now it has come to pass. We don't have to speculate anymore. It's out in the open.
And so where can people... Again, I know we spoke about this in the podcast, but just as a refresher before they get into the episode, what are places or where are places that they can keep up to date about these repeal of ballot measure, the updates on the reward, and the updates on everything that's happening that we spoke about on the podcast?
Yeah, the best place is just our website at RockyMountainWolfProject.org.
Okay, perfect. So you guys go to that. And again, thank you, Courtney, for all the updates, and we will get you onto the episode right now. So as our guest here today mentioned, it's been a couple of years and there's been a lot happening in Colorado. So we had kind of a double dip this week with Colorado wolves, the reintroduction efforts, and also some of the coexistence measures that are happening. And who better to have on here than the chair of the board of directors of the Rocky Mountain Wolf Project and a wildlife biologist, Courtney Vail. Courtney, I can't believe it's been a couple of years. It's wonderful to see you. How's everything going with you?
I am well. I am in a state of a little bit of apprehension and anticipation. We are poised to have another round of catch and release, so to speak, in Colorado. And to put it bluntly, the wolf program is under attack from every corner of the state. So we have our work cut out for us, and we've been working this past year on a number of fronts to secure the long-term future for wolves in Colorado.
So just talk about, because you mentioned this to Stephen and I prior to us starting to record, what's been the change in Rocky Mountain Wolf Project? Because you said there was sort of a little bit of a shift from, I think, when we last spoke. What's been the directional tone that you guys are taking now since Paws on the Ground, or even before that, where you guys have started to shift your mission and your efforts?
Yeah, prior to Proposition 114 and leading up to Proposition 114, the Rocky Mountain Wolf Project was a very loose but very coordinated and passionate coalition throughout the state of academics, scientists, researchers, volunteers of every stripe and color, with a primary mission to bring wolves back to Colorado. Once the initiative passed in November 2020, Rocky Mountain Wolf Project kind of realigned its mission and its focus and its staff. We're an all-volunteer board. There's 6 of us that devote our time and dedicate our time on a volunteer basis. And our primary focus is coexistence. It's reducing conflict and supporting Western livelihoods and basically addressing the misinformation around wolves, of course, as part and parcel of everything that we do, and advocating for wolves. But we know that the delimiting factor in Colorado and the long-term future of wolves is going to be around social tolerance and reducing conflict. That's going to determine the future for wolves in Colorado. So that's our focus has now become primarily, and it's now in our new mission statement, working for people and for wolves, right? So that's where we're focusing our energy.
Have you seen, because you talked about the apprehension and a little bit of tension towards these next catch and release, what are some of those apprehensions that you have? And you sent a lot of great articles, which we'll get into, and some stuff that we've been seeing on the ground. There's been a lot of different conversations, I would say, on the entire effort in this last year. What are some of the things that you're focused on at this moment? And obviously we'll get into the efforts that you've put in, the license plate and so on and so forth. But what are some of the things that are really sticking with you as we head towards this next catch and release?
Well, the ag community is extremely well organized, and there's an extremely vocal segment of the ranching lobby, underpinned by a very sophisticated media campaign that's been working overtime to paint the wolf program as a disaster. And I think we know, and we think the facts tell a really different tale. We're all on a learning curve. And much of what's transpired this first year of wolf reintroduction and restoration is within the bounds of previous experiences elsewhere. Most importantly, the wolves released have survived and, for the most part, avoided conflict with livestock. There have been some hot spots that have really thrown us for a loop and that have challenged the program. And because of that, this concentrated kind of burst of depredations that happened in April, there has been a concerted effort by the ag lobby to call for a pause in the next steps of reintroductions, to basically slow down the tempo, give time for producers to prepare and respond, give time for the agency to ramp up, and basically pause the program. And why we're concerned, of course, is while it might seem reasonable that a pause would give more time for people to get prepared, we know that actually it's an attempt to really thwart the entire program and buy some time until Governor Polis leaves office and to basically repeal the Proposition 114, which is now in statute, right, to repeal the law. So this has come in a lot of different shapes and forms. And one of those is the petition, a citizens petition for rulemaking that was filed by 26 entities, the Colorado Farm Bureau, the Middle Park Stock Growers Association, the Wool Growers Association, and many individuals in Colorado. And this citizens petition has asked for a pause, understanding that if the petition is not granted, that probably a lawsuit will follow, right? That's kind of implicit. There's an implicit threat behind the petition for rulemaking. And the rulemaking is basically asking Colorado Parks and Wildlife to halt reintroductions until 7 demands are met. And those demands range from creating a range riding program, building and training a rapid depredation response team, a rapid response team, to a comprehensive communication strategy with communities and with producers, to testing and evaluating a whole host of non-lethal conflict reduction and mitigation tools. And so that petition is in the hands of CPW now, and part of their internal review process. And the next step will be for CPW to review and then make a recommendation to the CPW Commission. And we understand that that recommendation will be probably coming down to the table in January at the next commission meeting. So those demands are voiced in this petition, and it seeks to amend the regulations, saying that wolves cannot be reintroduced until these things happen. So that's one of the threats. Underpinning that threat that we're addressing is a couple organizations with very innocuous sounding names, but they're very much anti-wolf organizations, like the Colorado Conservation Association and Colorado Outdoors. They have basically underpin the same arguments through letters to the Canadian government, seeking to halt any kind of exports of their wolves to Colorado. Some of their arguments are that a formal NEPA analysis was inadequate. It didn't adequately assess the impact of wolves in Colorado. It talked about disenfranchising Indigenous and First Nations voices, that those voices may actually disapprove of wolves leaving Canada and coming to Colorado, kind of co-opting all sorts of arguments. And I'm not sure they even have the legitimacy to speak on behalf of First Nations, but bringing forward these arguments that wolves are dying in Colorado. It's an illegal program because it had a deficient environmental impact statement and assessment on the front end, that CPW is not adhering to the state management plan. It's not being responsive to producers' needs and concerns. And so all of those threats are being thrown at the program. So those are just some of the examples of what's happening here. There's also lingering lawsuits around the NEPA analysis coming from some organizations, one of them the Colorado Conservation Association, and direct appeals to the Canadian government, basically to say, hey, don't send your wolves to Colorado. They're going to die in Colorado, notwithstanding the fact that they're being culled in British Columbia. I mean, over 1,200 wolves are recreationally killed in British Columbia every year, and over 200 are culled through government programs to address the pressures on woodland caribou, which have nothing to do with wolves, right? So all of that is coming at CPW, and again, this idea that a pause will make producers more prepared. It's a fundamental question whether the inertia and the reluctance of those producers who are not preparing now, knowing that wolves are on the ground now, and we've had literally 4 years of preparedness. We had 3 years on the front end of all of these stakeholder engagement meetings and processes. We've had, dozens, if not tens of hundreds of meetings in the state that have been conducted by CPW, Colorado Department of Agriculture, really bending over backwards to the ag community to not only develop compensation schemes that are very generous and that can address the loss of livestock, but technical assistance coming from not only the nonprofit community, but coming from all of the agencies, Wildlife Services, Department of Agriculture, USDA, and CPW. And adjusting the program accordingly. I mean, the initial introduction of wolves, if you remember, there were 10 that were brought in at the end of December last year, or we're still in this year, and just 10 were brought in, and those introductions were halted at 10. They could have brought more in, but they were responsive to the concerns that were coming from the ground. CPW has learned a lot. The agency has learned a lot this year, and hearing from the communities that communication needed to be better. They needed to be more informed. The local communities, that they took that to heart. They've been consulting with the 3 counties where they're looking to drop wolves soon. And they've been having those meetings. So, but, there is a very unified call from the ag community to pause reintroductions right now. That's the primary threat.
Yeah, I think we've had a few folks on recently that have sort of communicated that it's been, I guess, bittersweet. Just some has been great, some needs work. Where are you sort of with that? What needs work before the second round? Did the ag community have a point with the communication, or at least the vulnerabilities in the communication, or where does that idea land with you?
I've said over this last year that we've not even had the chance to celebrate wolves in Colorado. The agency has not had the chance to celebrate wolves in Colorado. And it really breaks my heart because the agency has done something extraordinary, and Colorado has done something extraordinary. And I'm very sensitive, and we can talk about, my approaches and the kind of the socio-psychological lens that I bring to this issue that is so important. But This is a successful program, and there's growing pains, and the agency just getting its shop in order, so to speak, how it responds to depredations, how the investigations go, how it communicates this information to the public, ramping up and hiring conflict specialists, securing budgets to secure the program for the long term. All of that takes a lot of work. So there have been growing pains. I acknowledge that, but I have seen on every turn that the feedback from the communities is being taken to heart, and we can talk about what the agency has been doing and is doing to meet those shortfalls, meet those deficiencies over this past year, where where maybe they got tripped up, right? But yeah, so no, this is an amazing feat, and to have the 3 wolves didn't survive. They were all males, but we had the first Denning pair, right? And we had wolf pups born in Colorado, and they're showing us where our weaknesses are. They're showing us where the weaknesses are in rancher preparedness for wolves, right? And they're showing the agency where its maybe weak spots have been and are. And it's even showing the wolf conservation and advocacy community where we need to focus our attention, because the resentment that was fostered by Proposition 114 being a public ballot initiative, and the ranching community feeling that it was shoved down their throats, even though it was a democratic process, that urban-rural divide and the front rangers pushing something onto the Western Slope, that's real, and that resentment is going to fester. That resentment will not go away with one-sided solutions. The solutions have to involve the livestock producer community. They have to. It can't just be wolf advocates' vision of wolves in Colorado. That vision has to be embraced by all in Colorado. It's not going to work if it's a one-sided solution. So that resentment has to be addressed, and that we can talk about that, how we do that, but it's going to come back to bite us, because we've been able to push down and push it under the rug for a little bit some of the things that I know are going to come back, like the call to hunt wolves, right? The call for recreational hunting is going to resurface when there are enough wolves on the ground. When that population grows, we know that that's going to come back. And so some of those things that are contingent upon understanding, tolerance, collaboration, that's the important work. That's the hard work. The biology is easier than the human relations part.
Right.
And we know that it's politically
Yeah.
and sociologically complex, and the biology is the easy part.
Yeah, we definitely do want to get into just what improvements you're seeing, or what improvements are being worked on. But just before that, on something you said, is the preparedness issue that you've mentioned, is that an issue of resources, budget, availability of tools, or is it an individual resistance to the tools, do you think? Well,
I would argue that the resources are there, and we've worked really hard to make sure that they're there. As I said, there's a lot of proactive outreach to producers to get them signed up for site assessments, vulnerability site assessments. There's funding to do that from a myriad of sources, again, which we can talk about. And there's the engagement from the agencies, with the producers. So, there's a sense that it's the inertia or the political will of the producer to make a little effort, And for those producers that are, in that more reasonable middle and that are interested in getting prepared and are taking the initiative, we have success stories around that. Where Fladry has been deployed in North Park, for instance, and around ranches, there have been no losses to livestock. But you know what? Those stories are not being told in the media. The poster children for wolf reintroduction in Colorado are the squeaky wheels that have had depredations. And they may not have been that responsive to taking action either. Some of them had carcass pits that they kind of dragged their feet a little bit on moving or burying, right? So they had an attractant. They were reluctant to deploy deterrents or conflict prevention measures like flattery or fox lights and critter getters, right? So there has been a reluctance from some, but there has been proactive collaboration from others. And those are the stories that I hope we find a way to share. And I hope that those early adopters within the agricultural community can find a way to have the courage or the means to be able to kind of work from the inside out within their communities to show that, listen, it works. It can work. It takes some work. It does take effort, earnest effort. But as long as you make the earnest effort, there's other options on the other side of that for chronic depredators. And part of the other work that I've been involved with is that I was asked to participate in an ad hoc working group by Colorado Parks and Wildlife that they created as a temporary working group. It's not a decision-making or a consensus body, but it was to be a sounding board, to develop relationships, to bring down the temperature around the Middle Park depredations that were occurring and the calls for lethal control of the Copper Creek Pack. So this working group, there were 4 from the ag community, 4 from the wolf restoration community, and 4 from the agency. So this working group was really important to develop relationships and work on a definition of chronic depredation and also inform a lethal take protocol for when it's appropriate, when certain steps have been followed, for a producer to apply for a chronic depredation permit or for the agency to actually remove wolves lethally, right? So all of that is more work for producers to give them predictability, to give them assurances that they're being listened to, that there's a process here that is not just fully discretionary, right? That they have some outcomes that they can rely upon if they do their part too. So that's been another part of this work is to continue that engagement across the aisle. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a really elementary question probably, but just about the first steps or initial logistics of getting tools to ranchers. So CPW reaches out and says, hey, we have these tools, we have these resources. Do you want them? Or, ranchers have to reach out and say, I have a ranch, I'm worried about wolves. Can I take advantage of these tools? Or how does that, initial communication generally play out?
Yeah. So there's been communication when wolves are in predictably localizing in an area. They have been reaching out to producers to give them a heads up, right? You could argue that wolves are in the state. They could travel hundreds of miles. They could show up anywhere. Like you should be prepared. Right. You could argue that, and I will. But you can also say that because wolves are moving, and there's so few of them, you might have a big window of when you actually have to take action, right? And sometimes it's going to be reactive. It just is. But so in order to be proactive, CPW has refined its process for conducting site assessments. It's integrated, importantly, with Colorado Department of Agriculture and Wildlife Services. So when a producer calls up their district wildlife manager at CPW, that's who they call. That's the first stop. Call up your DWM and request a site assessment. The conflict specialists will come out and spend a couple of hours on the ranch identifying vulnerabilities, prescribing certain tools. This can be before or after wolves are in the area, right? And it might be after there has been a depredation, if that's the case, and then they can talk about hazing or aggressive hazing or other tools so that wolf or wolves do not get habituated or develop patterns that are going to be detrimental to wolves and to livestock, right? So there's a process. It's, the DWM holds the hands along with the conflict specialists, and then the producer has to agree. The producer has to voluntarily agree to implement those tools. And so there's a checklist, right? And they check that box saying, I will or I will not. And that will not will be considered at the end of the day if lethal control, is being asked for. That box will be considered, whether that producer deployed tools or not. And in the regulations, it's required. Essentially, it says that there will be a variety of non-lethal tools deployed and used. So as part of the decision-making tree around lethal removal. So CPW has refined that process and has tried to make it as easy as possible for producers.
So when we're going into this next round, because you talk about a lot of the sort of these updates, and I was going through the information that you sent along, which I saw posted just the other day that CPW and CDA they have an improved livestock conflict minimization program that they're launching. Mm-hmm. There was a range riding program, I think, that's launching, which is something you mentioned. Are these things, how are these being funded? Because I know you really spearheaded the Born to be Wild license plate, which I know is raised close to $600,000, which is incredible to be used for multiple different avenues of compensation or helping with non-lethal tools. There's an anti-poaching reward, which we can go into things like that. Are these improvements being implemented prior to the next release or sort of in conjunction with? What information can you give on that? Because the range riding thing, I think, is imperative. I think that's really great. Yep. Since we've spoken to a couple, Daniel Curry, who was a great range rider, yep. or is. So where does that stuff sit with a producer, and then also you guys implementing those types of things?
Yeah, so to be clear, all of those programs have been relatively in motion, if not near completion, throughout the course of this year, right? Okay. So, but they're being formalized, and so let's start with range riding. So CPW has discretionary use over those license plate funds that will hopefully reach around $635,000 by the end of December, which is incredible.
That's awesome.
And so they have decided that there will be a statewide range riding program. At first, CDA, Colorado Department of Agriculture, was going to take ownership over that piece, the carcass management and range riding, because it makes sense, right, to have it in the ag agency. But CPW is going to have a role in this too. So they're going to collaborate, and they're going to have a formal training. The first one's in January, and the second one will be in April. And it will be to kind of create a training and certification program for range riders. So they have sent out the call for interest in the range riding program. They've received over, I understand, 100 responses from applicants, basically, who are interested in the program and being a contracted range rider. So CPW will contract range riders. CDA will also hire and contract range riders. Producers can do that on their own as well, or avail themselves of certain funds to do that. So CDA, Agriculture, also has a grant program for up to $40,000 per grant to support carcass management and range riders. So there were 4 range riders in Colorado this past year. And one was funded through Defenders of Wildlife, and the others were funded through CPW. So CPW has its budget, right? It's got the license plate funds, which I understand they will be using to hire those contract range riders. And then they have the collaboration with CDA, with the Ag Department, for its grant sources. There's also another source for producers. That's the NRCS. So the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service has a grant program as well, $2.5 million that will cover range riding, carcass management, electric fencing. So producers can tap into that too. And many producers are used to tapping into NRCS and EQIP grant. So yeah, all of this is working in tandem. So that's the range riding program. I will say one of the other threats that we didn't talk about was a call from the Joint Budget Committee that kind of oversees budgets for the state agencies in Colorado. They're facing a $700 million shortfall, and they've basically done an analysis that said, hey, if we cut the wolf program back this next year, we can save $2.1 million. And what they don't understand is that that's going to cut into compensation for producers. It's going to cut into the budget for conflict prevention and reduction. So they're going to shoot themselves in the foot, because you're going to be taking away the funds that the ag community is going to need to feel comfortable around wolves, right? So obviously that's part of that bigger picture that seems to be self-reinforcing about pausing the next round of introductions for all of these reasons, for the cost. So to date, I think $5 million has been spent from 2021 to current on the wolf program. But CPW was under budget for the past 2 years. So, so that whole cutting corners or cutting bits and pieces out to make the state budget work. I think at the end of the day, it's going to come back to bite them if they focus on the wolf program.
What exactly is carcass management?
So it's removing any dead animals, burying, removing, relocating, rendering inedible, whatever you can do. And there are best practices around that, but just so you don't have an attractant. And actually, that's one of the conditions under the lethal removal decision tree, that a producer cannot have had luring or attracting, intentional or unintentional as part of their operations.
I see.
Okay. So when I watched I watched your PBS, or the PBS piece that was run, where you were part of that along with Joe Stanko and Matt Collins from Western Landowners Alliance. Are those bridges being extended out to other places when they see 3 different people from 3 different groups, banding together to sort of go through the ranch and make sure that things are good? Are people seeing that as a positive communication? Do they see it as, oh, it's just for TV? I know that obviously media and things can be spun any way anybody wants to, but what impacts are you seeing from pieces like that go out on a public service for people to see, hey, there's a way to work together to have a discussion at a table and make sure that there's compromise all the way around so that this continues to be a successful program going forward?
Yeah, I don't know, to be honest, whether the ranching community sees those pieces, right? Those relationships are real, and they're built around trust, and the work that we can do together is done sometimes behind the scenes and carefully and incrementally built upon a solid foundation of trust, right? So having been in the field deploying Fladry and on a few ranches and talking openly about even the need for pausing, right? Understanding, I can understand. It sounds reasonable, right? That if you give us more time, we'll be more ready. But I actually think more wolves means you'll be more ready, because you have to get through it to get through it. You have to go through to get through, right? And so knowing human tendency and inertia, I'm not sure there will ever be enough time, especially considering the antipathy around wolves, right? So those relationships are really important, to have those honest conversations and try to understand where we're coming from and try to find solutions. And some of those solutions, are reflected in the choices that were made, that the agency made. For instance, the decision to capture the Copper Creek Pack, came out of some of the conversations in the ad hoc group, right? About what are some solutions? Are there any creative solutions where we get to this same end goal of getting those wolves off the landscape? Not everybody was happy with that decision, right? But we can talk about that too. So those relationships that are in the PBS piece, I don't know who's seeing that, John and Stephen, but those are just examples of where the media has gotten it right to showcase areas of collaboration, because the narrative in the media is fully negative, right? You've seen it. And there are a heck of a lot of people collaborating in the state, whether it's NGOs, with the agencies, with the producers, right? Or, just producer to producer. And it will be wonderful when some of those producers can come forward. A few of them have, and I won't say any names on the podcast, but some of them have come forward and said, the collaboration was great. We even had nonprofit partners come out that were trusted, and we didn't have any depredations this season. And that Fladry worked. That Fladry worked. Yeah. So those relationships are important.
So when you talk about the Copper Creek Pack just for a moment, and give people, I guess, a little bit of the background of why that decision, if you know, the decision obviously was made to take them off the landscape to make sure, I guess, that they were protected to a degree. I'm not really sure the whole detail. And I know there was back and forth on social media, as we see with everything that's controversial in people's eyes, that it goes back and forth and people agree on certain things. So ultimately, they are going to be re-released, I believe, the end of this year or beginning of next year. I can't remember what the deal is, but just tell everyone, if you can, the reasoning for the capture of them and now the eventual re-release back into Colorado.
Well, Middle Park was a mess. It was a perfect storm where you had the first denning pair in Colorado, proximate to or on the rancher's property. You had a concentrated amount of depredations in a short period of time. So beginning in early April through the month of April, let's call that, I don't know, help me come up with a good word for that month. But it was an inflection point for certain in this program. And while that decision to capture wolves this time was made because of the small population in Colorado, the fact that it was the denning pair, the fact that the producers called for lethal control pretty quickly, the fact that CPW denied the permit for lethal control because there was an attractant on the properties. There was a reluctance of the producers to deploy conflict mitigation tools. There was intense effort. There was night watch on those properties from CPW to make sure there wasn't another depredation and needing to protect that pair and their pups. So because of all of those circumstances and the fact that it was so early in the program, and this was the first set of offspring from these wolves, the decision was made to capture them. Aggressive hazing needed to happen probably sooner with at least the male wolf and with the pair before she went into her den. And there was a time frame where there was a little bit of a learning curve, right? Because CPW can only do what the producer allows them to do on the property. So having access to the property, the wolves were in a very difficult location to reach. Whether they wanted to try things like supplemental feeding, maybe dropping some carnivore logs from airplanes, to hazing, to what are the spectrum of possibilities that we could have done to prevented that situation. Not sure that it could have been prevented necessarily, right? But a lot has been learned from it. So CPW made that decision to capture that family. And they caught the female first, and they caught the pups. They thought they had all of them. They caught 4. Turned out there was one more. There's a 5th pup out there that they didn't catch, who's still out there. And the male they caught, and he was underweight, and he was compromised. He had an injury to his leg. He had puncture wounds to his leg. And he died a few days after capture, not from the capture, but he was compromised to begin with. So it's not clear whether it was predator or prey that caused his injuries, but the male passed. So 3 males have died in Colorado. 1 male wolves. One was a mountain lion, determined to be a mountain lion. One was determined to be another wolf, and then this kind of unknown for the Copper Creek male. But it was definitely an injury. The one male, 2307, the necropsy showed that he had a healed gunshot wound to his hind leg. So knowing that, they did a full assessment when captured in Oregon, and that was not there or on the radar, to my knowledge, at least. I'll qualify that. It's likely that injury happened in Colorado. And that, when we've got the necropsy result back for that male wolf, that's when we decided to strategically launch the wolf reward. Even though we had the wolf reward in the works for almost a year. As soon as those wolves dropped on the ground last December, I was on the phone over the holidays getting pledges for the reward and talking to other states about how they implement their rewards. And we know that it was just a matter of time, not when, but if, when there would be a poaching. and or an illegal killing in Colorado. I mean, threats implicit and explicit on social media have been going back and forth since the wolves were dropped last December. So we were trying to wait strategically when to announce the reward, but it's been in the works for a long time. And as soon as we heard that there was a healed gunshot wound to that one wolf, we decided to announce it and put it out there.
So for the reward aspect of it, while we're on this topic, how can that number fluctuate and go up if it's it's landed as a 50K, but is it something that people are able to, I guess, donate into? What are the parameters surrounding a poaching of one of the wolves in there? Obviously, I'm sure there has to be a necropsy done. If there's a wolf that's dead and it's suspected that it's a poaching effort, what are the things that go into that reward being activated for somebody who calls that in, let's say?
Yeah. So just think of the 50K as a floor, as a minimum. That I hope it grows. That's just a minimum amount to be significant enough to matter. So the Operation Game Thief, which is actually a separate nonprofit that sits aside Colorado Parks and Wildlife, it's its own entity. It determines through a citizen board what the reward amounts are for each incident or species. It can go from $500 to $1,000, even for an endangered species. That's it, right? So we don't think, and I think others would agree, that that's not a lot of money to support an informant who might be turning on a community member. It's going to take a lot to do that, right? So to be preemptive and proactive, we wanted to announce it before there was an incident in Colorado. Most of the other states have done it after already there's an incident, whether it's a poisoning or whatever, and launch it to say, hey, these wolf life matters. They matter. The taxpayers have invested a lot in these wolves, and maybe think twice before you decide, to take out a wolf. So that's the preemptive part. We know that fines and kind of, taking away hunting rights is probably, and enforcement is probably the most effective, but we hope that the reward will encourage information from the public to, if they see something, to say something, right? So that 50K is the minimum. Anybody can contribute to the reward. So just reach out to me if you're an organization or an individual who wants to contribute to that standing wolf reward. We set the threshold at that reward will be issued when there are formal charges issued from the agency, from law enforcement. Some states use conviction as the threshold, but we decided that conviction is such a long-term, it has a court process, there's appeals. Formal charges means CPW had its ducks in a row and it's ready to prosecute, right? So that's the threshold for us in Colorado. We work side by side with law enforcement, meaning that process is in place. The tip line is there. The informant can stay anonymous. It's not our process. It's already prescribed and established by CPW and OGT, Operation Game Thief, right? So, and law enforcement does their thing, and all we're doing is boosting the money amount. That's it. That's all the reward does, is to increase the incentive.
So when we're looking at, and thanks for that, and those, we'll have obviously links to all this stuff in the description. When you're looking at the next bout of catch and release, Courtney, what are the things that CPW is taking note of right now? The stakeholders that are involved, what are the things from the first time to the second time that you can pinpoint are going to be different or maybe have been tweaked from the next time? Obviously, where the wolves are coming from is different, but what other factors involved for all and for everyone that's involved in this process are going to be a little bit different from the first time around? Obviously, we've spoken about all of the different conflict reduction strategies, but in terms of catch release and actually paws on the ground, what's going to be a little bit different from the first time around?
Well, I think primarily communication strategy. Not only how CPW is communicating with the local counties and communities where wolves will be dropped, but also in what they share and with who they share it with. So there's a balance between having to keep things tight to protect CPW staff and the wolves, right? But there's got to be a degree of transparency as well. So that's a tightrope that CPW is walking, and they have to walk. So they've done this proactive outreach to the 3 counties that they're forecasting that they will reintroduce wolves. So most of those 3 counties are different than the last 2. So the last 2 were Grand and Summit. These are Pitkin, Garfield, and Eagle. So Eagle is where Vail is. Aspen is in Pitkin,
Yep.
and Garfield has some ski resorts too. So it's ecologically sound as well as the last ones. It's part of that donut of the Northwestern, area where CPW has focused in the past. That showed it has the habitat and ecological suitability, and it has the lower potential for conflict. So that sweet spot, it's still around that sweet spot. It's kind of bound by I-40 and I-70, but it's kind of focused in those ski towns areas this time around. So communication strategy is big. Who they invite to participate in those releases. I know that last time around, some individuals were brought in and that were able to witness the release. I doubt that they will be doing that again. I don't know, but maybe they'll. I don't know. But that may be different this time around, right? Because there was some concern about who was chosen and leaving out local, county commissioners and things like that. So I think that will be different too.
Sure.
Yeah, speaking of that, what do you think was the reason that CPW felt that it was a good idea to hide the specific location of the next release?
Well, we're monitoring, and I know they are too, the chatter on social media about threats. We know that, the first pack that came over from Wyoming, a Moffett pack that established itself, it was lured back over into Wyoming from Northwest Colorado, and it was basically obliterated, right? So there are folks that, unfortunately, are hoping and willing and able to lure and or wait for any kind of wolf activity at the border and have nefarious intent, and that that could translate into what happens in the state too around release sites,
Right.
and there's a lot of anger and resentment that still exist. You could still say that it's very early here in Colorado, and I'm not sure that we've adequately addressed that anger and resentment. That still is going to bubble up in lots of different ways, right?
Right.
What do you think to that end? What, from your perspective, what are some of the ways that you can combat that going forward? Or combat might be the wrong word, but maybe try to dissipate or lower the temperature in those ways so that this release and the subsequent ones, and you've laid out the plan about, again, more conflict reduction, the management, the conversation. Is there anything else that you would say that would have to be done alongside those things to bring the temperature down and to have a little bit more compromise and collaboration?
It's the toughest of questions, John, because as I said, human relationships are hard, and I think that most people would rather go to the dentist than, talk to, an opponent, a perceived opponent at the end of the day. And a lot of people in my community don't choose to do that. We have the spectrum of strategies that keep this perpetual war going. Lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit, right? The yo-yo back and forth of listing and delisting. And having someone come off position and it takes a lot because it's not safe. And coming off position means that you have to do some work. And it's so much easier to share a common enemy than make a new friend or make room for understanding. And It is the hardest of things to understand someone you disagree with. So a lot of people don't want to do that hard work. Most people don't, let's be honest. Let's be honest. So we're going to have, and it's easier to stay in your corner. It's so much easier because none of us has to change. So I have to say that, again, this comes back to the psychology that the only way, and it sounds so trite and so simple, but if you look at the scientific literature, the only way to dismantle stereotypes and biases and the way that we as human beings are cognitive misers, we only incorporate that data which we already believe. The only way to come off of that is friendships. The only way to come off of that is spending time with the other. The only way, it's so simple, but you know what? It's the hardest of things. So I know a lot of people, especially in my community, don't hold confidence in stakeholder engagement. They think that it's a very concessionary process. If you give an inch, they're going to take a mile.
Right.
And, you know, with the history of wolves in other states, it's easy to see why we feel that way. And the persecution continues, but the persecution continues because the resentment continues.
Right.
And wolves are low-hanging fruit. They are easy to scapegoat. They are so easy to scapegoat. I mean, it almost makes me emotional, right? So the hard work is in the middle with the people that are able to say, I respect you. I understand your position. Maybe we can do this a different way, or maybe how we even talk about it a different way is the start. I mean, and I know that's a little nebulous, but obviously dialogue is important. Showing up is important. I mean, the fact that I've been able to show up on some rancher properties as Rocky Mountain Wolf Project, and they trust that I respect them, and they respect my position too. But I'm there to actually help them because I know in the long term that's going to help wolves. But I also care about their, you know, I care about their livelihood and I care about them, right? So it's genuine. But that's where I sit. That's my place, right? But there's so many different tactics and strategies that just unfortunately reinforce this perpetual war. And I feel like incrementally there are battles in between that we could be winning that might get us to a different outcome. And a lot of that for me is informed from my decades-long work dealing with these issues in traditional communities, in communities where we know that the more I press or that we press, they're just going to dig in their heels, right? We know that. We know that the more somebody presses and forces you to do something, you're going to resist with all your might. So that's what we got to find a way around. That's the long game that takes a lot of human relationship work.
And I think too, what you said, it's almost as though uncomfortable and compromise are dirty words in these scenarios. And Stephen's brought this up a couple of times, is that we have to get to a place where, like you said, we are talking with the opposite or the other, like you said, in quotes, just somebody that doesn't necessarily fall within, you know, maybe our circle. But for the most part, we are very, very similar in our attributes and the things that we care about and all of that. And the one thing that always comes up is family, and that we all, for the most part, everybody believes in family on the human side. And that is the highest level of, appreciation or value in a wolf pack is their family. So if that's something that we could somehow cross and get people to understand, hopefully we can get to that point. Is there
I just want to share real quick. One of the commissioners told me the other day, he said, it's really hard to hate up close.
That's right.
And it's so true, right? And all of us are defending something, and we're all defending our worldview. We're defending our territory. Some want conflict to continue, and will do anything in their power because conflict unites too. And then there's people that want to solve conflict, and then there's those that don't know how. And so there's a lot of room between, wolf fear and wolf worship. There's a lot of room in between to make some headway and to make some ground.
What if there's one other piece that you want to share, Courtney? What is it that you want to either tell anybody who's listening to this or just promote going forward from your perspective with Colorado and the wolves that are going to be coming and dropping their paws in the coming years?
I mean, I'm going to keep advocating for wolves. It's imperative that we get the next batch of wolves on the ground, not only for the sake of the future of wolves in Colorado, but for ranchers too. It might sound counterintuitive, and I mentioned this earlier, but I believe that without the pressure of wolves on the landscape, some producers are not going to move past their inertia and resistance. And more time without wolves is not going to buy more tolerance, I don't think, or preparedness to actually implement tools. The time is now, and I'm going to advocate for dialogue, for tolerance, for engagement with your opponents to find that common ground and civility. There's a lot of ground to cover. And I think people will be surprised when you sit behind a keyboard and you wage your war. It's so much easier, right? And to then just reinforce what people expect from us. A rancher is going to expect from a wolf advocate to be X, Y, Z, and vice versa. And it's very easy to perpetuate that cycle. And I think most people would really be surprised if they actually spent some time together. I'm so encouraged by the younger generation of ranchers that I've talked to, and a lot of them are young women, I have to say. They want to address the misinformation about their ranching lifestyle. They care about wolves. They break the mold and the stereotype, right? And I feel like there's more out there than we give credit for, and we get caught up in the negative media narrative. And as I said, how do we move somebody off and give them the room to respond differently? And that's where the change is going to happen, right? And I'm going to continue to celebrate wolves, because I'm tired of looking over our shoulder, waiting for the next depredation. And we should be really proud of this initiative and the work that we're doing across the board. And we should be proud of the agency. So instead of being hesitant about that, we need to really continue to celebrate this achievement and support the agency where we can.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great statement. And you're right in the sense that if we give everybody time and space, things usually tend to work out better. So hopefully the time and space I'll put out there for time and space for everybody, because there's so much that you've told us about today, and hopefully on a positive light note to kind of go through this. If those license plates ever get made into something that out-of-staters can get, I want to be the first one to know. But tell everybody where the best place to get all of this information. I know there's a lot of different places to go, but give people a direction for where they can either find out what's happening on the ground, who to follow, and what they can do.
Yeah, I mean, a great place to start is just RockyMountainWolfProject.org. And for those interested in the license plate, wolfplate.org. And I can send you those links that you can send out with the podcast. And if folks are interested in my other work as well with other species and in other ecosystems, they can check out my website as well at lightkeepersfoundation.com. And that gives you my background on all of the work that has informed my approach in Colorado.
Yeah. Courtney Vail, you're such a valuable person that we've had the pleasure of talking to multiple times. And one of these days I think we'll meet up in Colorado at some point and we'll chat this over in person. But thank you so much for all the work that you're doing, for the information, and trying to pave the pathway forward for wolves and for humans to coexist. We really appreciate it.
Thanks to you both. And we'll work on that license plate for you.
Thanks so much, Courtney.
All right.
Just hang tight while we sign off. How's to all out there? We'll talk to you next time. Bye, everybody. Looking for more information about Wolf Connection or the podcast? Please visit our website at wolfconnection.org, where you can donate, sponsor a wolf, or become a volunteer.